This one is called The Beggar. 2 years ago, I moved out of my parents' house and into my first apartment all by myself. I was attending college part-time and working part-time at the local newspaper, so my days were pretty busy and I was usually not home until already dark. On one particular evening, a few weeks after moving in, I was walking up to my apartment building at about 7 p.m. with some takeout bagged up. A homeless man who obviously slept behind the building came up to me and asked if I had any spare change. He reeked of alcohol and vomit. I couldn't help feel sad for the guy. I did not offer him any change, but I did bring him down some leftovers. When I was done eating, that began one of the most influential friendships of my life. So that was nice of her. I would always stop outside the building after work and look for the man so we could talk a little before I went inside just to see how his day had been. On occasion, my uppity neighbors would give me a dirty look while passing into the building, which I quickly shrugged off. After all, he was still a human being and deserved to be treated with some dignity. Just because his life hadn't turned out like theirs was no reason to cast him off like garbage. After a month or so cooking for the man, well, more so, I would cook dinner for myself and make enough for a second person. And I would plate it up on a paper plate and walk it down to him and chat while he ate. This seemed to thrill him to no end. Fast forward about 3 months. I had left late from work this particular evening because we had a staff meeting about newspaper deadlines. It was nearly 9 before I reached my apartment building. Annie, my friend from work, had walked home with me since neither of us had school or work the next day. We were going to watch some scary movies and order in some food. Upon arriving, I noticed the homeless man throwing up near the alley. I held a finger up to Annie to signal I would be right back. And I went to check on him. I jogged over to him, put my hands on his back and asked if he was okay. He just kept vomiting. Finally, I was able to get a good look at his face and notice blood around his mouth. My eyes scanned down to the ground where he had been vomiting, and I noticed the blood there as well. Terrified, I called out to Annie to call 911. She ran into the lobby, got the security guard, and then placed the call. After another minute or two of vomiting, the man just collapsed into my arms and I slowly placed him on the ground. He was no longer breathing. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. There was nothing they could do. I was so heartbroken. Even though I had so many conversations with this man, I never asked him his name. To this day, I have no idea, and it breaks my heart, honestly. After that, there was not a day that went by that I didn't pause outside the building to look for the man before remembering he was gone. He was gone. It was a habit that took me a while to break, and for reality to set in. He was not going to be there anymore. He was gone. It took about a month before he didn't cross my mind all the time. Life had just started to get somewhat back to normal. That's when the activities started. One night in particular, I had to help write out 3 separate columns with a coworker, and it had taken us was about 10 to finish. I walked into my apartment, threw my keys on the table, hung my purse on the coat rack I have by the front door, and went straight to the fridge to figure out what I could make myself that would take at least the least amount of effort. Let me explain that my kitchen was not the largest. I was a college student, and even though I had a part-time job, it was the nicest place I could afford on my salary. To the left of the fridge was a little bit of counter space with a sink. To the right of my fridge, there were all of my cupboards. So when the fridge is fully opened, you cannot get into the cupboard. I grabbed out some ham and cheese and mayonnaise and decided to make myself a quick and easy sandwich. I nudged the fridge shut with my shoulder and turned to walk to the sink, and for rows, every single cupboard was open. I set down the sandwich supplies and went through the entire apartment, checking closets, under beds, windows, and locks. No one else was there. Back in the kitchen, I hesitantly shut all of the cupboards and made myself the sandwich. I sat on the couch, turned the television on, and tried my best not to think about the incident for the rest of the night. It was another 2 days before I noticed anything else unusual. Again, I had just gotten home from work, but at a reasonable time. This night, it was around 6:30, and I decided just to heat myself up some chili. I opened the can, put a pot on the stove, turned the burner on, and emptied the chili into it. I hurried off to my bedroom to change into some lounge shorts and a tank top while the chili heated up. After a minute or two, I went back to the kitchen, grabbed a wooden spoon out of the drawer, and started to stir the chili. The first thing I noticed was its consistency, as I assumed I must have not turned the burner high enough. I reached for the dial and noticed it was in the off position. Well, that was weird. I shook my head, assuming I must have forgotten to turn the dial. I turned it on at a 6 and sat on the couch to watch some news while it warmed up. During the first commercial break, I walked over to the stove and checked the chili. Again, the burner was off. At this point, I was seriously thinking I was losing my mind. I removed the pot from the burner. I turned the burner on at 6 again and waved my hand over the top. There was definitely heat coming from the burner, so the stove was working. I placed the pot back on the stove and stood in front of the whole time while it warmed, slowly stirring it. Then, as I was stirring and listening to the news in the background, I heard it. It was a tiny click, click, click. I looked from left to right, trying to figure out where the noise came from, and noticed that the burner dial was off again. Frustrated and assuming this was the best I was going to get from my stove tonight, I pulled the chili off the burner and spooned the lukewarm mixture into a bowl. I grabbed a spoon and sat back on the couch to finish the news. That night, I was in bed reading one of my crime novels. My eyes were starting to hurt and droop. I was so tired. So I put my book on my nightstand, turned on my light, and rolled over on my side. Just as I was drifting off, there was a tapping on my window. At first, I thought it was just a tree limb in the breeze. Then I remembered there were stairs outside my window. After a few deep breaths, I convinced myself to go look as the tapping got more aggressive. Then, as I expected, there was nothing there. Just as I was letting go of the curtain and turning back to bed, the tapping happened inches from my face. I felt like the blood drained from my body, and I was trying not to shake. A shapeless blob, static and dark, was floating around outside of my window. I let the curtain fall back into place, raced over to my nightstand, turned my lamp, and tried my best to stay up most of the night. I finally passed out from exhaustion around 1 in the morning. With more clarity the next day, I started to play the incidents over in my mind. The more I thought about them, the less scared I was. All of the weird things happened after the homeless man passed away. I was pretty sure this was him. Was he telling me hello from the other side, or was he trying to get my attention for other reasons? Over the next few years, stuff happened on and off. Usually subtle things, nothing ever scary. The window tapping was probably the scariest of them all. I have seen the shadow figure quite a few times, the one I saw outside my window that night. I have to wonder if he will ever cross over, or if he just wants to live with me forever. I never knew his name, so I dubbed him John. Some nights I will just talk with John after he shows me that he's around. He seems to like what I think. Haunted apartment. I had been anxious to move out of the dorms and experience the true freedom of New York City for a long time. When I found the apartment, a roomy 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a pre-war walk-up, I was ecstatic. It even came fully furnished. I signed the lease, packed my clothes away, and headed uptown for my new home. I was happy, but only because this was before I knew Mr. Gray. The move-in process was seamless, save too many trips up and down the stairs, and within just a few days I had settled in. I planned a small housewarming with some friends for the next week, but in the meantime I had to have my best friend Miriam come fawn over the place. "It's so cute, Jody," she exclaimed before even crossing the threshold. That's one of the things I like most about Miriam. She's always so positive, full of energy and life. We cracked open a bottle of wine and descended into overlapping chatter, flying through all of the usual topics like men, money, and of course our staggering course load. We wanted to be journalists and write for the Times, and we took our schooling very seriously. Finally, the bottle was empty and our conversation slowed. I turned to turn off a movie, and we agreed on a cheesy rom-com. We nestled into the couch and enjoyed the view of the sinking sun across the city skyline. Everything was peaceful until we heard the footsteps. I'd been getting sleepy, my eyes drooping as the sun plunged below the edge of the world, thrusting the city that never seems to sleep into the night. Then I heard footsteps again. They were quick and percussive, and sounded like they were coming from right behind us. I stiffened and turned around. Miriam did the same, pausing the movie to hear them again. It was silent for a moment, and then the sound repeated as clear as day, just like someone was no more than a few feet away. Our nerves were on edge, but we wrote it off as a neighbor and some odd acoustics. We resumed the movie and sunk back into the couch. My eyes became heavy again. Crack! With a noise like a strike of lightning, the bathroom door at the end of the hall slammed shut. We both jumped to our feet, hair on end, and met one another's gaze. There was someone in the house. Though I was frozen in fear, Miriam leaped up and darted into the kitchen, returning with a silver butcher's knife. She pressed her finger to her lips as a sign to remain silent. grabbed my hand, and we crept down the hall together towards the door. When we reached the end of the hall, Miriam pressed herself flat against the wall, knife in hand. She gestured for me to open the door, and with a shaking hand I reached for the knob. I took a deep breath in and flung the door open to reveal nothing at all. The tiny window, not even large enough for an adult to fit through, remained closed and locked. I even threw back the shower curtain to be sure the classic psycho scene seared in my brain, but there was nothing. That's when Miriam started laughing. When she spoke, her voice was honeyed with relief. Quote, "I'm so glad no one else is in here to see us making fools of ourselves like this," unquote. I tried to laugh along with her, but my nerves were shot. Something wasn't right. Miriam could see my worry. The mortuary. I've seen a lot of death in my time. My father ran a morgue, and ever since I was old enough to stomach seeing dead bodies, I spent a lot of time helping him out. Over the years, I have seen a lot of death. My father once referred to his job as seeing the many faces of death, which I'd always found a rather poignant way of looking at it. When I was about 15 years old, my father got up in the middle of the night, went down to the morgue, and shot himself. None of us had seen it coming. There had been no indicators in the past few weeks or days, and the night before had been like any other. But that morning, the body on the table was one that was all too familiar. The strangest thing about my dad's death was the contradicting evidence that it wasn't a suicide at all. The ballistics report from the police claimed that the trajectory of the bullet was odd. Not what you would expect of someone shooting themselves. Despite his death was never officially determined to be homicide, so the case closed pretty quickly. But that piece of information about the bullet always stayed with me, and I could never let go of the idea that someone had killed my father. But there was little supporting evidence for that fact either. There was no sign of an intruder that night, and I hadn't heard anything either. I slept upstairs, and I'd always been a light sleeper, so I would have heard it if someone had broken in. After my father passed, my aunt and uncle moved into the house with me. They planned on fixing the place up and selling it so that I could move in with them into their own home. During the night they stayed with me, several strange things began to happen. Shortly after, I began to experience reoccurring nightmares about the morgue. I would dream about the dead bodies down there climbing off their stretchers and crawling up the stairs to get me. I know it sounds childish, but at the time, I would wake up terrified, covered in sweat, and expecting to see someone with a mangled face coming into my room. My aunt also told me about the time she had gone down to the kitchen and fetched a glass of water, and was startled by the sound of footsteps thundering down the stairs towards her, even though there was nobody there when she checked. My uncle had an experience when he was watching television one night. He was alone in the living room when the reflection of the TV screen he saw what looked like a man walking up behind him. Thinking there was an intruder, he quickly turned around and raised his hands to defend himself, but there was nobody there. When he looked back at the television, the reflection was gone and everything was normal again. The last time anything significant had happened was when my aunt was doing the dishes one evening. She was alone in the kitchen when she dropped one of the silverwares into the disposal just as she decided to just sell the house and the mortuary and try to get the best offer possible. Neither my aunt nor my uncle wanted to spend another minute at the house than they had to. I'm not sure what happened to the building now. Maybe it's a mortuary, or maybe someone converted it into a family home. Either way, I still wonder what became of it, and the events surrounding the passing of my father will always haunt me. I wondered what they had wanted with my family, and if somehow one of them had been responsible for